Our next presentation is called Empowering Developmental Students with Active Learning Strategies, and our speaker is Sharon Williams. Sharon received her BA in English at Louisiana Tech University and later completed her M.Ed at the University of South Florida and her Ph.D. in Leadership and Education and Higher Education Administration Specialization degree at Barry University. Dr. Williams' educational experiences include Director of the Title III Grant, Special Populations Coordinator, and Reading and Writing Workshop Coach. She has taught reading and English in middle and high school, as well as teaching college reading strategies and study skills at St. Petersburg College, where she is presently a communications faculty member. Her presentation today will demonstrate multiple strategies for engaging and empowering developmental students to participate actively in the learning process through metacognitive thinking. Sharon, are you ready to take it away?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm going to show my screen. Okay. Okay. Hello. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, great. I am Dr. Sharon Williams. I'm glad that you're on the line and on this webinar. My title is Empowering Developmental Students with Active Learning Strategies. And I want to know if you can see my PowerPoint. Okay. All right. Here we go. The objective of this session is to enhance students' independent learning reading strategies, to increase students' comprehension skills, to assist students in monitoring their own reading comprehension, and to promote positive lifelong reading experiences. Teaching strategies. What I do in my classroom is I like to have guided practice. I model with my students. I use scaffolding, and we do think out louds. So when I'm reading a particular story to my students or with my students, normally I read with a slower rate, and I begin to ask questions so that they can kind of see exactly what I'm doing as I read, and I share my think out loud. I also do lectures with the particular skills that we're working on at that particular time. And then I do a lecture with discussion. I like active and collaborative learning with my students. We also do strategic reading groups, whereas I give my students a rubric on different things they need to be reading, and I'll share with you those handouts a little bit later. In my classroom setting, we have cooperative and collaborative learning. And of course, we also have reflective journals. What I think is really important with students is for them to monitor their own reading habits. I began by asking students, what do you struggle with during reading? And then also at the very beginning of the sessions, I asked my students, what are some characteristics of a proficient reader? Once we get down to students responding to what are their characteristics of a proficient reader, then they began to think metacognitively about their own reading processes. And of course, the key benefits to students monitoring their own comprehension are these. Students will reflect upon their own strengths while monitoring their reading comprehension. Students will develop reading habits on their own so that they are prepared to read difficult texts independently. And also, students learn skills and knowledge in multiple lesson styles. Now, we all know that our students have different learning styles. Some students are auditory learners, some students are visual learners, some are kinesthetic, etc. So it's very important that we find out our students' learning styles, and in our method of delivery, it's important that we share different methodologies to enhance the students' learning processes. The next thing that I would like to share with you or ask you is consider your own teaching methods. Are you a type educator who means presenting materials to students in a passive manner? Or do we lecture with discussion involving our students? And it's so important that students get involved. Let them ask questions. They clarify their own learning. They're challenging themselves. Also in the reading process, we do a lot of brainstorming. encouraging students with participation and creative thinking. Also, I think it's so important that students become more reflective learners. They really need to stop, monitor basically what's happening with their own learning process. I find out with my students, I teach developmental students, and oftentimes they get stuck with their own reading processes. So I've asked them to, as we're reading particular texts or stories, I've asked them to begin to write down an exact sentence. We use dialectical journals. Write down exactly what they are reading, a particular sentence from the reading that they are, their reading assignment. Then also, what are their thoughts about it, about that assignment? Write down what worked, what didn't work for them. Next, reciprocal teaching. This is also excellent for peer learning because they begin to help each other clarify meaning, predicting, clarifying, questioning, summarizing what they've actually read. And of course we use graphic organizers, and especially we definitely use a Freyr's model type, and I will definitely show that to you in a few minutes. I'm noticing when students are having difficulty learning, they really are challenged with vocabulary. So I actually use the Freyr's model to help students in their learning process. And of course, guided practice, showing students exactly how to problem solve. And I'm quite sure you have the other methods that there's several other methods that I actually use in the classroom, but these are the key ones to make sure students are on task. Now, as far as the next steps, what I'd like to do is share with you some of my handouts. So I'm going to close this PowerPoint just for a few seconds, and I'm actually going to, oh wow, sorry about that. I had this up for my, let me go to my reading lab. And you know what? I am so glad that what I have done is actually, I have the slides, because if I sign in here, you're going to see what I'm doing. Hold on one second, and I do apologize. There we go. I'm actually into my reading lab, and what I have done with my students is I would like to show different methodologies that we use. For one thing, if you notice in my course here, this is my REA 0990 class, and this is actually called My Bridge to Reading. This is an accelerated course that we actually use at St. Petersburg College. My bridge to reading is a class that students take for 8 weeks, but the maximum time is 8 weeks. But some students finish within 4 weeks, some students finish within 6 weeks, and some finish right at 8 weeks. So what I do with my students if you notice in my Reading Labs course, they monitor their reading skills as far as they take a diagnostic test. After they've taken that diagnostic test, then we can further learn pretty much what's working for them, what areas that they need to improve upon, and then they actually are learning independently. So for now, what I'd like to share with you is I start off with my students regarding active reading. What are active reading notes? This is awesome. Students began to share what works for them, what's not working for them, and then we began to learn, well, really, what does good readers do? And I get this from Chris Tavani. She's given us different little strategies on reading, especially here where it says use fix-up strategies. I think it's very important for students to know when they don't understand, when they are struggling with their reading process. They need to recognize when their reading gets confusing. Not only that, but we work with our students on finding ways to get unstuck in that entire reading process. And I'm going to start up here about using their existing knowledge. What makes sense, they make sense of their new information, what they're reading. And of course, I always share with my students that they have prior experiences that they bring into this entire reading process. We begin to make connections, meaning that when we do our particular vocabulary words or so, maybe like the word ostentatious, flashy, showy. Have you seen that word before? Maybe when they go to a newspaper article, and now that we're actually reading the stories, they begin to make a text-to-text connection. They also make text-to-self connections in their reading because maybe something was nostalgic, or maybe it reminded them at a particular time in their lives, or maybe someone close to them, so they make their text-to-self connections. Then they, of course, making text-to-world connections. Most of the time I always say, how many of you have heard about Hurricane Katrina? And of course they'll say New Orleans, etc. Print conventions is another really good skill of what do good readers do. And some of our students, I share with them, highlighting is a great tool, but I'm quite sure some of your students will probably highlight the entire page. So we go through and find out meaning, what's meaningful. Every time we read for a purpose. And we don't necessarily have to highlight everything. We also use our print conventions as far as symbols, putting a question mark outside of the margin when we don't understand anything, some of the material that we don't understand. What really gets my students is I focus in at the very beginning of the semester, sharing with them that it's so important that we become more active readers, that we dialogue with the text, that we ask ourselves questions when we read and make predictions. Okay, so I won't go through all of this, but this is one of the strategies that I start off at the very first week in class. We begin to dialogue what good readers do. And not only that, but I give them this particular handout so that they'll know when they get stuck to continue to refer to this. Right here where it says ask questions, draw inferences, looking for clues in the text and determine what's important. I continue to ask my students to continue when they're reading to ask themselves what keeps repeating, what's the main point, do I have enough supporting details, and then they use their key signal words in their reading to help them along the way. So that's one of the handouts, active reading notes. The other part that I find really helpful for students is when they begin to use their Freyr's model. Actually, on the Freyr's model, as I've asked students to use index cards. So they use 3x5 index cards, or they may use the 5x8 index cards. And on their index cards, here's an example of Freyr's model. We actually use the vocabulary book that we go through. Actually, we use the 10 Steps book for vocabulary by Langdon. I'm sorry, the 10 Steps for Reading a vocabulary book. And that book is actually by Advancing Vocabulary Skills by Sherry Mist. It's the 4th edition that we use. And as they do their vocabulary, I ask them to use Freyr's model, meaning that they're actually going to write the vocabulary word, write the definition on the back of the card, because I anticipate that they will dialogue with their peers. And this is a great study tool, and it's also a way of building that learning community. Students are connecting with one another. I asked them to share the same examples of that particular word, in this case ostentatious, pretentious, show off, grandiose. And then what is it not? That means plain or austere. And normally the students draw a picture here. And I wish I had that the exact index cards to share with you, but I'll let this suffice. And also their use of vocabulary sentence from their vocabulary workbook. So this is the Freyr's model, and I tell you, I get raving results from students using this Freyr's model so that they can really own that vocabulary word, and then they begin to become more reciprocal learners, helping one another through that process. So that's another process that I use. Not only do I use the Freyr's model, if you notice, on this particular handout here, I've asked students to use the Dialectical Journal, is what I shared with you before. And here's the, I'm sorry, let me go back to my other one. The Dialectical Journal that students actually use in their reading process. We actually read several stories. In our college this year, we had one college read, and we read The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. So in that particular book, I asked them to use dialectical journals. I give them this handout at the very beginning, and it models how to do a dialectical journal. Of course, it says the purpose of a dialectical journal is to identify significant pieces of the text and explain the significance. What I'm learning with my students is when they use this dialectical journal, they begin to become better writers because the more you read, the better writer you become. But I've asked them to write an exact sentence from the textbook, the page number, what the sentence was, and then some of the things is what are their notes, what are their thoughts about it, what are their reflections. And I give them this example. Of course, I have an example of Toni Morrison's book, Song of Solomon, and I received this from this particular website. I had a model for Walden by Henry David Thoreau. And then at the very bottom, other ideas for journal writing. As they're reading stories from the textbook, I actually use both the Langen's 10 Steps to Advancing College Reading Skills, and I also use The Master Reader by D.J. Henry. So within those books, they're reading particular stories, and when they get stuck, I say to them, okay, write the exact sentence from the textbook, and then I like for them to journal, I don't understand, or I had to reread, so I give them some writing prompts, which is right in this area here. The other strategy that I actually use in class that helps them join the reading and writing process is the organizational patterns. And on this one, I clicked the wrong one again, but I'm going back to it. Organizational pattern sheet. Okay. On this handout, relationships and patterns of organization, I think this is very key because what's happening here is I've asked students to know what is the pattern of organization overall within a particular paragraph or reading, and then also between the sentences. And what I've done, I have taken excerpts of these, and this is actually taken from Langen and also the 10 Steps for Advancing College Reading, and the My Reading Lab is what I've gotten these from. So I give credit to where I've gotten this information, but I'm showing students when they're reading different items to highlight, to definitely highlight their transitional words so they can really identify the patterns and then take ownership of knowing what that pattern of organization may be. So those are some handouts. And finally, what I'd like to do, what I work with my students is in my reading lab, I give them a timeline because like I said, this class is actually 8 weeks, and I set them up and share with them where they should be. Now notice in my reading lab, students don't have to complete all the modules if they have mastered it in that diagnostic test. So I use this as a reading, my reading lab or the reading techniques too for my bridge class as a guideline. And then I conference with my students one-on-one. I give them a rubric so they'll know what they are working on. And each time I share with them whether they're on target or not. And with this in place, this really helps them to stay focused. So again, sharing with my students tools for success to set them up for success. And finally, what I'd like to share with you are some student testimonials. And here's a testimony for one of the students. And of course, I've had to, you won't see the students' names, but you'll see pretty much what their grades are. This is one of their student completion sheets, and I asked them to record their grade. And if you notice in this particular student, didn't score too good on the midterm, but by the time they had taken the final test and then actually their My Reading Lab assignments, their overall score, we can see what the student made. But here are the comments that the students have made. The handouts worked very well. Once I started using them to my advantage, I could have organized my study time more effectively instead of trying to get it done all at the last minute, because I converse with students and sharing with them, it is so important to stay focused and to do time management. So that was student 1 testimonial, and here's another testimonial from student 2. Sorry about that. Let me close that because I don't want to student name. I thought I got rid of the name. Okay, here's one. This particular student says, the way that we were able to work at our own pace really worked best for me. I would recommend this class to my peers because if someone is behind in this class, that can show you how you need to work on I would recommend this class to my peers because if someone is behind, this is the class that can show you what you need to work on at your own level. And so again, conversing with the students and allowing the students to take ownership for their own work and allowing them to monitor pretty much where they are in the process has helped them along the way. And of course, they complete in a really great, timely manner. And finally, I will go back to the PowerPoint to share with you another strategy that I actually use. Anticipation guides. When the students are actually, before they actually read the material, it is so important that the students be prepared before the reading and modeling, scaffolding them to ask questions during their particular reading activity. And here's a pattern that we've actually used, and actually used the book from Jim Burke, Reading Tools and Tips for Techniques for Reminders. So I give my students an anticipation guide, show them through the process so they can begin to ask questions regarding their particular reading. And of course, another tool which is also awesome is the SQ3R, survey, question, read, recite, review. And again, I try to model this with my students every process that we go through so that they can become better readers. I really enjoy setting up a learner-centered classroom because in learner-centered classroom, it is important to engage the students, making sure that the students take ownership for their learning. It's important for the students, for me, to encourage the student through their process. And of course, throughout all of this, I communicate high expectations for what I expect the students to learn through the process, aligning that up with my curriculum objectives, and making sure I foster an active learning environment. Students are interactive with their peers and the instructor. And also, the instructor, for myself, I have to emphasize time on task because time plus energy is learning. And of course, I'm getting this information from the 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education from Chickering and Gamson. And as I researched, I found out through the joint report, A Shared Responsibility for Learning, that definitely learning is a social activity, and modeling is one of the most powerful tools. So I try to emphasize that in my classroom. And also, it is only by acting cooperatively in the context of common goals, as the most innovative institutions have done, that our accumulated understanding about learning is put to best use. And who do I learn from? Of course, are my students. My students engage in that learning process. They become more involved. They have become more active readers. And by that process alone, we have had tremendous success for students passing reading. And again, I want to share with you that my particular process for reading, and I'm going to end this part right here, is truly to engage students and let them take ownership for their entire learning process, and making sure that when they finish my classroom, I have rigor in my classroom with my curriculum. And I think it's so important that students take ownership for their own learning, that they begin a guided process with the redesign structure that we actually did with my reading lab, which was an 8-week, 2-credit hour delivery course. It was offered in a blended course setting. We actually meet in computer labs twice a week for a total of 2.5 hours. And as far as the process, as far as the student outcomes, actually before we had the My Bridge reading, it was and still we have both at St. Petersburg College. We have a REA 17 class, which is actually 16 to 17 weeks. And then we have my Bridge to Reading, which is actually an 8-week course. And we've shown significant improvements in students' learning. Actually, right now, in 2011, 2012, we had an 83% passing rate with C or better. So this actually concludes my session with my Empowering Developmental Students with Active Learning Strategies. And I've shared with you the handouts that I use in class to help the students along the way. If you have any questions, this is a key opportunity to share your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sharon. We do have a couple of questions for you. The first one is from Becky from Midwestern State University, and she was wondering, are your reading journals electronic or bound notebooks?
They are bound notebooks. I actually have them use their compositionals. I have the students write in there the dialectical journals. And I tell you what a huge improvement in their writing skills when they do this, as well as their reading skills.
Okay, and we have another one from Mandy regarding your use of My Writing Lab in your developmental class. She did ask this a little earlier in your presentation, but she asks, she says, only a few of my students have access to a computer. Are you in the same situation? And if so, do you find it challenging to incorporate technology in your class, or do you like using it regardless? And then she asked, do you do My Writing Lab work in class at all? But I know you said that you do meet for a total of about 2.5 hours a week.
Right. And I'm glad that you asked that question, because in this particular course, in my reading lab, we actually are in a lab setting. However, I do have students who are challenged with having access to a computer or internet. What our college is doing, we are emphasizing learning support centers. So I've asked students to go to the Learning Support Center when they're doing their homework assignments. And actually, educators have been volunteering to go into the learning support centers to help tutor students along with their instructional tutors there. So even if a student does not have access to a computer at home or internet at home, they can actually go to our learning support centers, and they do their homework sessions there. All of my information and the student text online? Some of them are handouts, but this particular class, in my reading lab, definitely you have to have access to a computer. But I do many lessons within the classroom, and after that, students are using the computers in the class. But if they don't have access to the computers, they go to the learning support centers at our campus.
Okay. Do you find that kind of are they deterred from going at all, or do you have like a low low response rate because of that?
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, this class has proven itself. We actually did a study prior to that. This was headed by our dean, Dr. Martha Campbell, at our campus, and also Sharon Griggs in the math portion. So we had my reading lab, my math lab, and also my writing lab. Do students get deterred from this? No way. They come in. Of course, I set them up, and I didn't show you. Hopefully, I actually have a time schedule from 6, and I start my timeline from 6 o'clock a.m. until like 12 o'clock a.m. That I work my students through the process. They actually have to share everything on their learning plan to say, at 6 o'clock in the morning, this is what I do. I have to take my kids to school. This is my study time, etc. So when we set them up for that, we're setting them up for success. Building that, do students kind of stray away a little bit? Sometimes. But what I do is actually have an early alert at our college. So we're calling them in, and they come back and they finish. I think the persistence in this particular class is that it is an 8-week course, and students just are staying on task, and some of them, again, complete before the 8 weeks. So that keeps them motivated, that keeps the persistence going, and that helps them to become more of an active learner. And once they finish with this, they can actually sign up for other classes.
Okay, we have another question from Becky. She says that we must now combine developmental DE writing and reading. Do you have any ideas about that you'd like to share?
Yes. As a matter of fact, there is a particular text that I am going to model, and I was trying to see if I actually have it with me. We are actually working on that process at our college, and in all actuality, even though it is an informal what I'm doing, I'm actually doing that now in the class that I'm teaching with my developmental reading, my reading lab, and then also with my regular reading students. I actually combine the writing and reading together. Do we actually have that as a particular course right now? Not collectively, but that is in the process at our college.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up now and just get ready for the next session. But if anybody else has any questions for Sharon, please let us know, and we'll forward them on to her once the session is complete. And then, stick around for our new session with DJ Henry. Thank you so much, Sharon, for your presentation. It was great.
And thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. And again, they can contact me at any time if you have additional questions. And I'm sorry I don't have that book with me.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much.